So let's talk about CSS. At the moment, what we have in the app is pretty much nothing. Yeah, hello app, white, black. Not very exciting. But let's introduce the fundamentals of CSS. First things first. As you may have noticed, on the main app.javascript file, we are importing a CSS file. Yeah, that's the way we can load some CSS styles. So if I open that file, app.css, we got a lot of noise because these are the default styles that came with Create React app to have the React logo, the background. We don't need any of that, right? I hope you agree with me. That's completely unnecessary. So let me remove, first of all, the majority of the styles. I'm going to leave just the first one. App text align center. That means the title is in the middle of the screen. Yeah? But let's talk a bit about how to apply basic styles on CSS. Just a general overview. So can anybody tell me, so for instance, how can I imagine that I want to have a special title? Yeah? So I'm going to use a div. Class name equals title. Welcome to the CSS workshop. Happy face. Yeah? So can anybody tell me how do I change, for instance, the color of that piece of text on the CSS? Dot class name, like that? Dot title, correct. Dot title, yeah. Font, what? Font color, like that? Just color, that's correct, guys, just color. Give me a nice color. That was too easy. Khaki. Yeah? What do you think from a UX point of view? You cannot even see anything, right? Let's find something nicer. Purple. Slightly better. Yeah, but too small. That's too small. How do we increase the size of the text? Font size, fantastic, everyone. Font size, 45 pixels. Cool. Nice. And now, what if I want to add a border surrounding my title? Border.
Just use the border.
Border. Size.
In black solid.
1 pixel.
1 pixel. Solid.
Then choose a color.
Give me a color, Panos. Red. Okay. You're right. You're right, Panos. You see? So, look, this is a shorthand. Shorthand. When talking about border, in reality, there are at least 3 properties we may look after. First of all, border width, 1 pixel. Then, border style, correct, solid. And finally, border color, red. Yeah? So these 3 lines can be merged into this shorthand that I hope you agree with me. It's just easier. Yeah? The result is the same, but let's leave it like that. Yeah? So do you know any other style apart from solid?
Dash.
Dash, correct. Dash means there will be some tiny rectangles, yeah, separated by some spaces. It's a bit hard to see, but if I zoom it, yeah. Anything else? Any other style? Correct. Dotted, correct. Tiny dots. Yeah. So yeah, you get different styles. Yeah. Cool, fantastic. What if, that looks good. First of all, let's increase the width of the border because that's much better. 10 pixels. So how can I add some air, fresh air, to avoid the coronavirus between the title and the border? Padding, fantastic. So padding 30 pixels, for instance. Nice. You see, I got some spacing around the box. Can I have different padding for the different sides of the box?
Yes.
How we do that?
So you can add 4 values,
Yes,
and starting from top, right, bottom, left.
that's correct, Panos. Top, right, bottom,
Left.
left. Yeah? Clockwise. Think of the clock. Yeah? 12, 3, 6, 9. Clockwise. That's correct. So we can have, it's a bit hard to see. Let me increase. So for instance, they have a huge padding top. You see? So you can definitely apply different styles. What happens if I have only one value? Applies to everything. That's correct. And what happens if I got two values?
First value is top and bottom. Second value.
Correct. The first value refers to the vertical axis, and the second value points or attacks the horizontal axis. So first value top bottom, as Adam said. Second value left right. So that's okay. Let me add a second box. So I got title, and now I got another title. So welcome to CSS. Let me simplify the text a bit for visibility purposes. By the way, not sure if you notice, but I snap the CSS to the right. I particularly like to have multiple source files open in parallel. You know, when you change the JavaScript and the CSS, simplifies. You know how to do that? When you open a file, you can simply drag it, and then you drop it either on the left or to the right. I think from a productivity point of view, it doesn't look that good here because I'm zooming the screen a lot, but I'm sure on your laptops it will look much better. Yeah? So welcome to CSS, and then happy coding. So let's see how that looks like. Two boxes. So how can I add some spacing around the boxes? Margin, fantastic. Margin is pretty much the same as padding. The difference is padding runs between the content and the border, and margin talks between the border and the sibling elements. Yeah? You can see the margin outside the box and the padding inside the box. Yeah? You can think about that like the text is your bed. The padding is the space between your bed and the walls in your bedroom. And the margin is the space between your house and your neighbor's house. So the padding belongs to you. This is your space. But the margin doesn't really belong to you. Yeah? You don't have control on the space between your house and your neighbor's house. Yeah? Does it make sense? Communal space. Yeah, I like that. Fantastic. I like that. And now the next question is, how can I mean that I want to have multiple titles like this one, but because of whatever reason, I want to change the border color just on the second box.
You want to apply an ID.
An ID.
Yeah. A unique ID to that second box.
And what if in reality I want to change the border color not just for one box, but for 2 out of 5? I like that. You can use multiple classes. Here, I got the title class. But now, I can create a new class, for instance, title green. So now, I can create a new class and then change the border. Green, yellow, I love that color. So now you pay attention, see, only the elements with that special class will take that border color. Yeah? Any questions so far? No?
So can I just?
Yep.
So I know the classes and what happened there, but from a coding perspective,
Mm-hmm.
when the program is reading the code, does it go title for both
Mm.
and applies all the properties and then goes to title green and applies that? So it's chronological, isn't it?
That's fantastic. We'll do a workshop literally tomorrow at 10:15 to talk about, to explain how the web browser decides which style applies, because Daniel's point makes a lot of sense. Eh? In reality, there is, when talking about the first box, the border color is crystal clear. Yeah, for sure it's going to be purple. But when talking about the second box, there is a conflict, because title wants to set the color, sorry, to red. Yeah? Did they say purple? No, ignore me. I'm talking about the border. Yeah. So when talking about the happy coding box, first of all, because of title, the border color should be red. However, now there is a new class called title green that wants to override the color. So tomorrow, it's one of my favorite workshops, we'll talk about specificity, which is something that even senior developers struggle to explain, even though it's a piece of cake, more or less. Yeah. We'll talk about that tomorrow. All right, so, you know, this is working fine so far. Of course, we could add more boxes. We could add more type of selectors. Tomorrow, we'll talk about selecting by ID, selecting by attribute. We'll talk about different types of selector. However, I would like to show you something. Google Chrome, and actually also Safari and Firefox today, they provide very powerful tools to debug your HTML, your CSS, and of course your JavaScript code. So let me present you DevTools. There are a few ways you can open DevTools to debug your app. My favorite one is simply to right-click anywhere and select Inspect. Once you do that, you will get something like that. At the bottom, you will get some panels with some stuff. Yeah? I'm not a big fan of displaying my DevTools at the bottom. I prefer to display them on the right-hand side. It's a bit more mobile friendly. We'll talk about that in the future. But anyway, that's just a personal appreciation. Yeah? The important thing is, here is, on the Elements tab, that is the default one, I believe, you can navigate through the content structure, through the HTML. And you can see I can now select different boxes. When I select a box, at the bottom, Google Chrome is telling us which styles apply to that box. Yeah? And I can play with them. So for instance, look, I can disable styles. If I untick the margin, you see, I can change some of them. So let's change the color from purple to black. It's a very easy way to prototype your application. What happens, guys, if I change the colors? You see, I'm changing many things here. What happens if I refresh the page? Will these changes persist? No, correct, because they are not saved into my local system. They are just in memory of Google Chrome. As soon as I refresh the page, boom, back to the original version. So using DevTools for styling purposes is very useful for prototyping, because you won't be afraid of breaking your app. You can play with it, you can change many things, but if you ruin it, that's fine. You refresh the page, and then.
Let's say I'm working, like playing with different styles, and I apply 3 settings on the page, and they look really nice. Like I want to import that into my project.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, that's a good point. Look, main that we are quite motivated this morning, so we start doing changes here. We get border, color. Let's find a good color. Ooh, Alice blue, blue violet, and then the border will become blue, and whatever. Yeah. And then let's change the second title. So the border color will be tomato. You know there was a color called tomato? Me neither. So imagine that as Adam said, you start playing and instead of ruining your app, you realize that, oh, that looks good, right? I really want to keep these changes. So then what you need to do is you copy what you've done, Control C, Command C, and then back to VS Code, and surprisingly, you paste. Remember to do it on every single rule you change. Yeah? And once you do that, I forgot to copy the second one, but anyway, once you do that, then the changes are obviously persistent. Yeah? Any questions? Cool. So with DevTools, we can do many things. We'll at some point we'll talk about creating animations, boxes moving and stuff, cool stuff. Yeah. So we'll see how powerful Chrome is to debug this cool stuff. Let me present you a very important principle in CSS called the box model. You see, when you got the Elements tab at the bottom or at the right, depending on your screen size, you will get styles. This is what we've already been dealing with. And also you got computed. Yeah? Computed is important. Why? Let me show you something. I got my div class name title. If I create a div inside of the other div, you see, will the first title still display these CSS rules or not? It will.
Yeah.
Why? We are not applying the styles. We are applying the styles to a different element.
Yeah, but we have the padding, we have the margin.
Yeah, but we have. Okay, what about the color?
Color would be. Well, it will be applied, yeah.
Will or not?
I think so, yeah.
Why?
Because it's inherited.
Correct.
Cascading, yeah.
Correct. 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 CSS, the first C means
Cascade.
cascade. Cascade. You know, cascade, it goes all the way down, right? That's the same thing. When you apply style on an element, all the all the children elements, or the majority, there are some exceptions, the majority of the children will inherit. So if on a title div you put the color blue-violet, any children will inherit that color, as you can see, so nothing really changes. Yeah? On the computed tag, we can do things like checking the box model. That's important, guys. Even though the resolution obviously doesn't, the contrast, to be more precise, is, well, a bit better, yeah? So what the box model is, this is the box model. The box model talks about how the selected box looks on the screen. If I select, for instance, the first title, it's a bit hard to see, but I hope you agree with me, there are some colors around my first title. Yeah? These colors are explained on the right-hand side. First of all, the content, the text, is the blue color. You see the inner rectangle? That's the content. The padding, which color is the padding, guys? Green, correct. You see? Content, blue. Padding, green. And DevTools is telling you the pixels that we are applying on each side of the box. Then, after the padding, we got the border. And then, beyond the border, we got the margin. So that's pretty convenient in order to determine or to understand how each box is represented alongside all the other elements on the screen. That's the box model.
The defaults for margin border padding 0?
That's a fantastic question. That it depends. It depends. For instance, when you create a div, yes, when you create a div, default padding, default margin, 0. However, if I create an H1, let's see what happened. Can you tell me what's going on here? Just looking at the box model. Border is 0, padding is 0, but what happened with the margin? 21.440. What the hell is that?
So inherited from H1?
From H1, yeah, but do you see in my CSS any reference to margin 21.440? I'm not dealing with that.
It's inherited from the tag, is it?
But who decides that?
CSS?
The web browser, guys. The web browser, by default, applies some styles. And you may be thinking, that's bullshit. Well, that's necessary. If I display without any styles, hello Minji, if I do that, hey, the browser had to take some decisions. The color is black, but black is a color. The font size, 16 pixels is the default font size. So the browser, if you don't tell anything, still in that case, if you don't have any single line of CSS, the browser has some defaults. So some defaults are quite acceptable or predictable, like black color, okay, default font size, you need something. But when talking about headings, they are a bit more controversial. Because you see, my H1 has a weird margin. And how do we know that? If I go back to styles, look, H1, what the hell is that, guys? Can anybody tell me what that means? Or what that message means? Correct, Ebrima. That's what the browser is doing out of the box by default. User agent, that's the technical way to describe the browser. So Google Chrome, by default, applies these styles to the H1 tags. Yeah? But can we override them? Can we change, for instance, the default color of the H1 tags? How we do that?
H1?
With dot?
No.
Why not?
It's a tag.
Correct. When we refer to a class name, we put the dot. Without any dot, we refer to the tag. In other words, all the H1 tags will have a color, I don't know, blue. Yeah? And of course, we can remove the border, the margin, whatever. Yeah? Boom. And suddenly, hello Daniel becomes blue. Does it make sense? So yes, the browser applies some styles by default, but you can easily replace them with your own custom styles.
Good question.
Yep.
I just noticed that we have two elements, according to CSS and happy codes, and they have individual margin, but the margin it's merging, so it's not 30 pixel and 30 pixels, 60 pixel in total. It's 30. Just notice some.
Yeah.
lines happening.
So when talking about padding and margin, this is a shorthand of 30, 30, 30, and 30. And the same thing applies to the margin. That's the result. Do you disagree with that?
No.
It applies 30 pixels.
I need between two elements. We have two divs with the same class. But when you hover over between those two, it's not 60 pixel in total.
That's a good point, actually. So what Ian is referring is a really good question. So his point is, if the first title has 30 pixels margin, and if you got 1 meter distance, if you want to have 1 meter distance with your neighbor, and he wants to have another meter distance, in reality, you got 2 meters in total. So Ian is right. In reality, what should be the space between the 2 titles?
60 pixels, isn't it?
Correct. Should be 60 pixels. But do we have 60 pixels between them?
That's because we're using the same class name.
The margins overlap.
So is it because like border is included?
That's a controversial feature of CSS. So you're right, the borders are overlapping. Okay? And that sometimes happens with CSS. Depending on the way you define your CSS, actually, I'll tell you something. Even if I check on the second box and I remove the margin top, and not here, sorry, on the other one, here. Margin top, oh, not topo, margin top 0. You see, nothing changes.
What if you say 60 pixels?
But that's the same thing. If I set up 60 pixels, the gap should be 120. Because it's 60 pixels at the bottom of the top one, plus 60 pixels on top of the bottom one. Does it make sense? Yeah, the margin is the space between one box and the other box. But the thing is, it's not working like that in this particular case. The margins are overlapping. Yeah? And that's a property in CSS that applies in some particular use cases scenarios. And I always found that a bit
Annoying.
say again?
I said annoying.
Annoying, yes, I agree on that. I agree on that. If you go to Google and you search CSS margin overlap, you'll find a lot of literacy about collapsing margins. Yeah? By the way, CSS Tricks is arguably the most important resource when talking about CSS. It's particularly important when talking about layouts, flexbox, grid. Yeah? It's very important. So yeah, so obviously there is a way to remove the collapsing border. I don't remember the exact property. Border collapse. No. How was that? Yeah, to be completely honest with you, I don't remember how to fix that. Collapse margin.
Would it be a box sizing border box?
Box sizing border box. That's a good idea. Let's try that. Box sizing border box. No. No, that's a different problem. No, it's not a box sizing problem. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how to easily solve the problem without applying weird techniques about using flex or grid. Yeah, so I cannot give you an answer, unfortunately, to the problem. It's something to be investigated. Yeah? Why sometimes CSS collapse the margins. Cool. Yep. Any other questions? So when talking about JavaScript, you will find out that there are many resources explaining how to write good JavaScript, how to scale your JavaScript, best practices, all these things. Yeah? However, when talking about CSS, unfortunately, we don't have any strong standard. Let me present you a problem. So, as you can see here, I created a class title, but then to create a variation of the title, I create another class called title green. Why title green and not is green or title green in camel case? there are many questions you come across when writing about CSS. And as far as I know, there isn't a single styling standard in that respect. However, I would like to present you one of my favorite books. It's about CSS. There is an online version. It's free. It's a short read, maybe 50 pages, from a senior CSS developer. Correct. So the creator says, hey, I'm tired of writing CSS by my own without any styling. I'm going to propose my way of writing CSS. You may disagree. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything. This is just my point of view, and I really appreciate it. I'm not following his coding style end to end, but definitely since I read the book, I think I'm able to write better CSS. So it's something I recommend you to read. The book is called SMACS, Scalable and Modular Architecture for CSS, a flexible guide to developing sites small and large. So, first of all, find some time to read that book, and also, it goes without saying that every single company in the world struggles to create good CSS. If you go to a job interview and they ask you, what do you do to make sure your CSS scales, blah, 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 and you bring that book to the discussion, like, oh yeah, I was really curious, I wanted to build really good CSS, I read a book called SMACS, do you know SMACS? They probably won't know that book. It's a way to put your balls on the table. Yeah? Also on your CV. On your CV, as you will see next month, it's good to talk about yourself a bit. I'm a passionate JavaScript developer. I'm super committed to learn. My favorite tech book is SMACS. It's a good to prove that you have some genuine interest. Long term, I've seen more companies struggling to scale up because of CSS than because of JavaScript. JavaScript is harder to build, but much easier to test. However, CSS is really hard to test. If I'm changing a line of CSS, I may break the whole application. This is much more complicated to happen with JavaScript, because with JavaScript, yes, you can break it, but you got automated tools, we'll see next month, to control this sort of problems. Specs. Anything else, guys? No? All right, so we're going to leave it here. That was just a very basic intro to CSS. We will run some more workshops about CSS. First of all, specificity. We'll also talk about building layouts with Flex and Grid, and we will also talk about CSS animations. Thank you.